Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up Sports. We have a good episode for you guys today. It's good to be back here in Idaho, coming back from Christmas break. We had a little time off, but if you did keep up with us over Christmas break, we put out a couple episodes with Roman Tomashoff and Hunter Fullerton, some good friends of mine and friends of the show. And then after the second round, so the quarterfinals of the college football playoff, we did a little live stream just because I was down in California. Didn't really have the full time to make a full episode. So it's nice to be back, be in a rhythm. We're back in the studio here in Nampa, Idaho, back at school for a spring semester. So it feels good to be back. What we're going to be looking into today is the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, as they both stood as the college football playoff semifinals in this year's playoff. And then news broke this morning, this was being recorded on a Sunday, that Mike Vrabel is going to be the new head coach of the New England Patriots, my New England Patriots. We're going to get into that towards the end of the show as well, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But let's start off with the Orange Bowl, Notre Dame, Penn State. As this college football season winds down, we have the national championship coming up on next Monday. So these semifinal games, they lived up to the hype. This is what people have been waiting to see in the college football playoff. We heard a lot of complaints early on about these games aren't competitive. These games aren't close. We put the wrong teams in. No, that wasn't the case. The issue is that it was the first round, so you have the highest seeds playing the lowest seeds, at least how the committee viewed it. And so when you have these better teams playing teams that aren't as good, the better teams tend to beat the 11, 12 seeds by a reasonable margin, and that's exactly what we saw in this playoff. Now, we didn't expect the Rose Bowl beatdown that we saw or games like that, but in the first round of any sort of playoff bracket, whether it's college football, NFL, baseball, whatever, you're going to see dominant performances in the early rounds because you're seeing really good teams get put up against teams that maybe aren't at that same level. But now that we're in the semifinal, we had two really competitive games here. Kicking off in the Orange Bowl, that was on Thursday night. Notre Dame clinched their ticket to the college football playoff, picking up a really, really narrow win over Penn State. And this game was really a tale of two halves. In the first half, you look at Notre Dame, and they really look out of sorts. Riley Leonard, he's turning the ball over. He looks rattled. Penn State did a really good job of limiting him in the run game, especially having Abdul Carter as a spy. And a lot of credit to Abdul Carter. I thought he played a really strong game despite the injury that he had coming into the night. So a lot of credit to him for fighting through. But in this first half, Penn State, it really looked like they were going to run away with it. And about halfway through that second quarter, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, man, is Penn State really just going to dominate this game after all this talk about how they can't win the big one? They can't win the games that they're not supposed to. And they're up 10-0. They look dominant. I know a 10-point lead isn't a lot, especially in this day and age of football. But just looking at Notre Dame and their inability to run the ball, which is really their bread and butter in this offense, we didn't really see Jeremiah Love, especially in that first half. And so it looked like the Nittany Lions were going to take it away. Drew Aller was playing not the best game I've ever seen, but he was finding his weapons. They were doing a really good job of getting the ball to their playmakers. They're getting it to Tyler Warren. We see him in the passing game and the running game. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, maybe the best backfield in all of college football, you could make an argument. They were all over the place. Katron Allen was running through dudes. Nick Singleton finding gaps, getting 6 to 7 yards a pop. And so looking at this game, especially early on, it looks like Penn State, they're dominant. They're moving the ball how they want to. Their defense is really dictating what Notre Dame is doing. And looking to the second half, I don't know what happened at halftime in that Notre Dame locker room, but Marcus Freeman must have had these guys fired up because the Fighting Irish were ready to rock and roll in this second half. I know Riley Leonard had that interception. That was a pretty inerrant throw on his part, but besides that, they played a really clean brand of football, and they played their brand of football. And that's what's most important in these playoff games is teams that are able to stick to their style of football and have success in their own ways. So in this second half, we had 31 points combined between both teams, which is saying something compared to the fact that it was 10-3 going into halftime. Notre Dame comes out swinging. They get 2 quick touchdowns on their first couple possessions. And at this point, you're looking at, the momentum has swung all the way to Notre Dame. Riley Leonard's on a roll. They're running the ball well. Their defense has pretty much stifled Drew Aller and that Penn State run game. And then as soon as Notre Dame goes up, it just turns into a fist fight. Penn State responds immediately, marches down the field, touchdown to tie it up. Next possession, like I just mentioned, Riley Leonard throws that ball. The receiver was open. He had to try and fit it in a window on the sideline because it was a flag route, which means you're going about 8 to 10 yards upfield, and then you're breaking it to the sideline. And so when you're making those kind of throws, you have to worry about two things. First, you have the safety over the top. So if you overthrow it above your receiver, then it's going to get picked off by the safety over the top. But if you short arm it, there's typically a linebacker or a DB, especially in a zone coverage, that is sitting about 2 to 3 yards below where that receiver is supposed to be. And that's exactly where it was. The linebacker for Penn State, I don't recall his name, but it was honestly not that bad of a ball. It was just a heck of a play from that linebacker to go up and get it, a fingertip snag. So just like that, you have another interception for Penn State. 2 plays later, whatever it is, they punched it in the end zone. So just like that, Notre Dame looks like they have the momentum, looks like they're controlling the second half. All of a sudden, Penn State comes back, 2 touchdowns in a matter of, 3-4 minutes of the game. And this just kind of set the scene of this fist fight that we had going into the fourth quarter. And we get into situational football, it really all comes down to 2 things in my mind. The first is coaching. You have to have a coach who stays calm under pressure, can get his guys in the places they need to be, keeps his team calm, and allows them to execute. Speaking of execution, that's the second key in situational football, is that you have to be able to limit your penalties. You can't have stupid mistakes like a holding or a false start, especially when the crowd is loud in those big moments. You have to be able to stick to your game plan, get the ball out on time, march down the field, and be efficient. And we've seen Penn State in this spot before multiple times this season, whether it was Oregon, whether it was Ohio State, some of the other close games they had throughout the regular season. And for the most part, they failed to succeed in these situational situations. That doesn't really make sense, but you get what I'm saying. When they played Ohio State, they had the ball inside the 5-yard line, and we didn't see Tyler Warren get the ball one time. The guy that got them in that position, that had been their moneymaker all game long against that Ohio State defense in Happy Valley, and he doesn't see the ball at all inside the 5-yard line. That's an issue that we've seen with this Penn State team in years past and this season, failing to execute in big moments. So what do we see? We see Notre Dame march their way into field goal position, and then credit to this Penn State defensive line and this linebacker group that had been a force to be reckoned with all night, getting pressure on Riley Leonard, hitting him, getting him in the backfield, sacks, targets, whatever it was. They were getting a lot of pressure on Riley Leonard. Even if they weren't getting him for a tackle for loss, they were still putting pressure on him, and that rattles a quarterback. And we saw him throughout the game be rattled, especially with some of those throws that we typically see him make. He even mentioned at the end of the game, it wasn't his best game. That Penn State defense got to him and ultimately kind of tarnished his performance a little bit in this one. And sure enough, this Penn State line comes up again big in the fourth quarter with about 5 minutes to go, probably less, and they knock Notre Dame out of field goal range. So what do we see James Franklin do? He decides to be aggressive. He uses his timeout, gets Penn State the ball back with about a minute left to play. They're pinned back in their own territory. But by calling that timeout, you get the message from James Franklin that we're going to go for the win, we're going to do what it takes to win this game, and we're going to try and march down here and kick a field goal and go to the national championship. Although I like that aggressive approach, you have to be able to have a team that can execute it, and as we saw in this game, Drew Aller proved that he just couldn't execute when the moment was at its brightest. Drew Aller gets the ball back, and I think it was second down because I think they ran a little short pass to play before that. But nevertheless, Penn State throws an interception inside their own territory. I think the ball gets picked off like the 45-yard line. Aller got hit when he threw the ball, but even if he didn't get hit before he threw that pass, I'm not sure what he was looking at. It was a 10 to 15-yard dig route, and the receiver's breaking in, and he is smothered by the DB, and not in like a pass interference or holding kind of way. He's just not open. There's no window for Drew Aller to fit that ball into. And I know that last year the problem with Drew Aller was he wasn't aggressive enough. He wasn't taking shots. Well, in this situation, you have to be able to recognize the fact that fitting the ball into a tight window is probably not the move. You'd much rather make a safe throw, keep the clock running, go into overtime. But nevertheless, Drew Aller throws an interception, and that pretty much seals the deal for Notre Dame. They get into field goal range. And one of the things I wanted to note about this, and I see this with a lot of teams in college football, is when you're watching the game and you see that green line on the field that says field goal range, that line typically means that that's the kicker's longest field goal that he's hit this season. that doesn't necessarily mean that he's automatic from 55 or 56. That means that's the longest he's made a field goal this season. And the reason I bring that up is because when we saw Notre Dame get into field goal range, they continued to move the ball. They even threw it on third down, which is a pretty risky move, especially in that kind of situation. But the reason I like this is because the closer the kick, the easier it is on your kicker, the less pressure he feels. And especially in this playoff, whether it was Texas or a couple teams in the first round that have missed field goals that they should have made, Notre Dame continued to move the ball upfield, get their kicker in a better position, and credit to Mitch Jeter for coming up big. We've seen kickers fail big time in these moments, most notably Burt Auburn in that Sugar Bowl when Texas faced Arizona State. He missed 2 field goals that he typically makes 9 out of 10 times, and he missed both of those despite being, one of the best kickers in the nation. And so a lot of credit to Mitch Jeter and Notre Dame for executing at the end of this game. And the reason that this game just felt so weird at the end is because although both teams were trying to be aggressive, there was just such a big gap in execution. Penn State, like I said, showed they wanted to be aggressive, showed that they wanted to try and go clinch their ticket to the national championship in regulation. However, they just couldn't execute. And when you throw an interception that poorly and at that time in the game, it kind of just resembles all of Penn State's season and what they've been as a program the last 5 to 7 years, a team that is knocking on the doorstep. They have an opportunity to do something big. And then right when they get their chance, they blow it. And that's exactly what Penn State did. But a lot of credit to Notre Dame. They're a strong team. I don't think anyone saw them in the national championship game before this playoff started. I certainly didn't. But a lot of credit to Marcus Freeman in this program. They're playing a tough brand of football despite the injuries that they have. So I think that they're one of the teams. I don't think they're the best team in this national championship game, but they certainly deserve to punch their ticket there, and we saw that in the Orange Bowl. Let's move down to the Cotton Bowl in Texas Friday night, where we saw Ohio State, who has been an absolute juggernaut in this playoff, taking on Texas. This is essentially a home game just down the road from Austin down there in Dallas. And despite Texas having the home crowd, it was somewhat of a sluggish performance, and not only from Texas, but this wasn't the Ohio State team that we had seen in the last couple weeks, whether it was at home against Tennessee or in the Rose Bowl against Oregon a few weeks back. But if the Orange Bowl was a game of similar schemes and matchups, the Cotton Bowl was just a dogfight between 10 to 15 players that we're going to see playing on Sundays in the next couple of years. The amount of talent that these two rosters have between the Longhorns and the Buckeyes, I mean, these are programs that are constantly bringing in 4-star and 5-star talent year in, year out. They're attacking the portal. They're bringing in the best players in the country on a year in, year out basis. And so for this game to be kind of back and forth and be a little slow, especially offensively, I really wasn't that surprised because with how much talent is on the field at all times, no matter whose offense is on the field and whose defense is on the field, you have 5-star NFL caliber players on the field at all times. And so early on in this game, we see Ohio State kind of start to build their momentum. First possession of the game, Texas turns it over on downs. Ohio State goes down and scores a touchdown, and immediately you're thinking, great, here we go again. Ohio State's going to blow them out, and I'm going to get to bed early because the game's going to be 30-0 at halftime again. Well, that wasn't the case. As soon as Ohio State scores that first touchdown, things kind of start to stall out for the Buckeyes. I think a big part of that was their penalties. They had the unsportsmanlike where Travion Henderson pushes the Texas lineman in the face, and you just can't have mistakes like that in games like this. I know Ohio State ultimately ended up being okay and they get the win, but as you continue to move on, and now that you're in the national championship game, you can't afford those penalties that scoot you back 15 yards and essentially just kill your drives as a whole. But as this game progressed, it was kind of back and forth, and all of a sudden it turns into a defensive battle where it's 7-0 Ohio State for the majority of the second half, and you're starting to think, okay, Ohio State can't move the ball, but if Texas can't do anything, then it's not really going to matter if Ohio State can score points or not, because at some point they're going to figure it out with that offense. Well, Texas scores that big touchdown right at the end of the second half, and all of a sudden things start to change. That Texas crowd gets into it. It's loud. There's like 20 seconds left in the half, and you're thinking, great, Texas is going to go into halftime tied. They're going to have the momentum because they scored to tie it up right before the half, and the second half is just going to be an absolute bloodbath. Well, Ohio State decides to open it up on a halfback slip screen and take it 80 yards to the house with Travion Henderson. And Listen to Steve Sarkisian, the Texas head coach, after the game, breaking down that defensive play call. He said that it was kind of a delayed pressure and that they still had 7 guys in coverage. Well, my question is, how do you have 7 guys in coverage and still not manage to make a tackle on a basic halfback slip screen? That wasn't some trick play or anything. It was a delayed play where the quarterback kind of sits there, waits, Henderson slips out into the flat, and all of a sudden he's gone 80 yards down the sideline. I just don't understand the idea of bringing pressure at all. I don't care if it's delayed. I don't care if it's an all-out blitz. Let them take 10 to 15 yards. That's fine. There's 10 to 15 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds left on the clock. That's 2 to 3 plays. At the worst, they get a field goal. And the reason that I harp on this so much is that in a low-scoring game like this, and as we saw in the second half, this play and this touchdown ended up playing massive dividends in how aggressive Ohio State was able to be at the end of the game. And it was somewhat the difference in that second half with Ohio State being up a touchdown up until the Jack Sawyer strip sack, which we'll get into in a minute. So big play there from the Buckeyes. You just can't give that up if you're Texas. I get it. It's the first half. I understand that they had an entire 30 minutes to make up for that, and they still continued to play hard and tie the game up at one point. But you just can't have that. And especially when you look at the very first possession for Ohio State in the second half, they throw an interception. And I know Texas didn't necessarily do anything with that, but if that's a tied game and Ohio State throws a pick and Texas is able to go put points on the board, you're looking at a completely different game. The momentum is all on the Longhorns' side. They're at home. That's just a critical sequence there, and I really thought it was interesting about how the last possession of the first half and the first possession of the second half played such an instrumental part in this game. Looking through the third quarter, kind of a dud, kind of goes back to that defensive style that we saw, and I don't think that means that these offenses were poorly managed or anything, because as we've seen, both these offenses at times can be really explosive. I just think these defenses are really good. Texas has one of the best secondaries in the nation. They have the best cornerback in the nation on their team. When you look at Ohio State, they have a multitude of guys that we're going to be seeing playing in the NFL in years to come, whether it's JTT, whether it's Jack Sawyer, Caleb Downs. All those guys are playmakers. And so when you have all of them out on the field at one time, you're not going to see a ton of explosive offense unless it's something sneaky like that slip screen that we talked about. So we head into the fourth quarter, similar to the Orange Bowl, where it's a tied game, it's knotted up, it's close. And at this point, Texas does have the momentum, although it's tied. But what does Ohio State do to start the fourth quarter? They go on a 7-minute, 30-second drive, chew up the half of the fourth quarter, and go up a touchdown. Just completely takes the wind out of AT&T Stadium. And although there's a ton of time for Texas to operate and run their normal offense, that's just a gut punch. It's similar in boxing to where you just take a massive body shot and you're not completely out of the fight, but the wind is out of your sails because you fought for so long, and then for that to happen and just not have an answer for it at any point in time really takes the wind out of your sails as a team. The offense and Quinn Ewers is on the sideline for a long time, so now they're cold, having to come into a high-pressure situation. And ultimately, we saw that pressure get to them on this last sequence. So let's get into it. We all know what we're talking about here. Texas gets the ball down to the 1-yard line after a couple pass interference penalties. And listen, I love Steve Sarkisian. I think he's an offensive mastermind. I really like how he calls plays and puts his players in position to succeed. But this was just an ultimate choke job on him. I don't understand any of the plays that he called. First and goal, the inside run, putting your defensive line at fullback, I get that. But if you do that on first down, why all of a sudden you try to get fancy and go to the outside with a halfback toss on second down? And now you're behind the sticks. You only have 2 plays to get 8 yards. At this point in the game, you essentially have to score a touchdown. And this play calling just made no sense to me. So we talked about first and second down. They have 2 runs. Now they're at the 8-yard line. Incomplete pass on third down because Jack Sawyer gets pressure on the quarterback, forces Ewers to make an incomplete pass. Little foreshadowing there with Jack Sawyer. Because what do we see on fourth down? We see a guy who bleeds scarlet and gray in Jack Sawyer. We saw his actions after the Michigan game. Not saying he did the right thing, but it just shows you that passion that he has for this Ohio State program. I mean, this guy's never beaten Michigan. He's never won a national championship. All the things that Ohio State fans expect out of their players, Jack Sawyer is fighting for that. And so to see him on fourth down with the game on the line, strip sack his old roommate and take it 80 yards to the house, That's just a legacy play right there. And I don't think people really understand how hard it is for a defensive end to run 80 yards from 90 yards, because it was at like the 10. So from the 10-yard line all the way to the opposite end zone, that's like a marathon for a defensive lineman. And so all this credit has to go to Jack Sawyer for making these plays. He cemented himself as an Ohio State legend at this point. But as much of a great play as that was, I just question Sark's play calling in this situation. I'm not sure what you're trying to go to here. I don't know why you would get fancy. You have 4 tries from the 1-yard line. You already put in your defensive lineman at fullback. Why don't you give him the ball and just allow him to run over everyone on the defensive line? We've seen them do that before when they have Byron Murphy playing defensive lineman for them last year. They'd put him in at running back. They'd give him the ball. He'd run over like 6 dudes. Easy touchdown every time. And so I know that Sark's creative play calling has got Texas in really, really good situations and allowed them to have a lot of success this season. But in this case, it cost them the game, and I just think that that's really unfortunate. So previewing this national championship game a little bit, and I'm going to come out with an episode previewing the game as a whole next weekend. But you have Ohio State and Notre Dame, 2 completely different teams, but I think it's a really interesting matchup because on one hand you have Ohio State, who, despite the Cotton Bowl being a little closer, they've been dominant since that loss to Michigan. Their offense, they have so many weapons, and they can beat you in so many ways. They can spread you out, They can get the ball to Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and all these dynamic wide receivers that they have. At the same time, they can chew up clock and run the ball with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins and chew up half of a quarter like we saw in this fourth quarter against Texas. And so as dynamic as that Ohio State offense is, they're going up against a Notre Dame team that is just tough. And that's really the only way to describe this Notre Dame squad. Obviously, they're super talented. I think their defense is one of the top defenses in the country. I think Marcus Freeman, has cemented himself as a top 5 coach in college football without a doubt in my mind. And so with how tough this Notre Dame team is and the style of football that they play, they're going to want to make things messy. They're going to try to turn Ohio State over, control the clock. And the reason why I think this is such an interesting matchup is because the last time Ohio State played a team like this, it was Michigan at home, in the shoe, big game, massive rivalry. And Ohio State and Ryan Day tried to prove that they were the tougher team, that they were going to out-physical Michigan. They were going to take it to them. And that backfired on them. And Michigan was able to play their brand of football because Ohio State wanted to throw on the gloves when maybe they should have just tried to stay out of that fight as a whole. And so with Ohio State playing a team that is physical, that is going to play you tough, that plays a slower brand of football, you can't allow yourself to play that style and try to do what Notre Dame is doing. You have to play your own brand. You have to get it to your playmakers. You have to incorporate tempo. Use that run game to allow Will Howard to execute off of the play action. And so if we see the Ohio State team that we've seen in the last 3 weeks, I think they will win this game easily. But if we see the Ohio State team that showed up against Michigan and we see the Ryan Day that tries to prove a point and allow his ego to get into the way rather than the Ryan Day who just coaches football and calls plays at an elite level, then it could be closer than we expect it to be. But nevertheless, we're getting down to our last college football game of the season. It's been really exciting, and we're going to have to figure out something to do after that because I love college football. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the next 6 months after football season's over, but we'll figure it out. We always do. Before we let you out of here, I want to hit on this news that we talked about a little bit at the beginning of the show. Mike Vrabel has been hired as the new head coach of the New England Patriots. And as a Patriots fan, this was really exciting news. Not only is Vrabel a former player under the Patriots organization and Robert Kraft, but he's proved that he's been a successful coach. And the reason that I think it's so important that we've got a proven coach rather than a former player in Gerard Mayo is because although I think Mayo has the potential to be a successful coach, and Robert Kraft stated that in his press conference after firing him, you can't put a first-year coach in a situation with a rookie quarterback and a offensive line that is one of the worst in the league, if not the worst in the league, and then a defense that is good but still young at some critical positions. And so you have to be able to have a guy who is experienced that can go in there and knows what he's doing. And Mike Vrabel is that guy. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to do with this defense. I think that you're going to see this defense get back to where they were before this year. They had one of the best rushing defenses in the NFL before Mayo got there. And when you look at the roster, it's the same guys. So obviously it's something internally inside that organization. I don't know if it's coaching. I don't know if it's Mayo calling the team soft 3 weeks into the season. But I think you're going to see this defense take a jump up back to where we normally see New England defenses, especially with how the secondary is developing and Christian Gonzalez being out there at corner as an all-pro now. And then offensively, I think we're going to see Drake May continue to develop. I mean, Mike Vrabel is a guy that made Ryan Tannehill look like an MVP caliber quarterback. And so as May continues to develop, as they continue to build the offensive line, having an experienced coach who has been there before, who has developed a team before, I think is really going to prove to be critical for this Patriots team. Now, listen, I'm not saying they're going to be a top team in the AFC next year or even the year after that, but you're going to see this squad take massive jumps throughout the next 2 to 3 years, and that's something that's really exciting for Patriots fans because as good as Drake May was this year, and as good as I think he's going to be, we didn't really see any improvements as a team. We didn't really see anything that said, okay, if we stick with Mayo in 2 years, we're going to be a playoff team. I think that this would have been one of those teams that exciting quarterback, exciting playmakers on defense, but can't really win games. And so now that you have Vrabel in there, I think he relates to the players better than Mayo does. I think Mayo tried to be too Belichick-ish, and now with Vrabel, he has his own persona. He knows how to run an organization and lead a team to success. And so I'm really excited to see how he leads this young Patriot squad. And hopefully, I'd like to see us win 7 to 8 games, at least be in the playoff hunt in the last 5 weeks of the season. Maybe that's a good goal to start with. Nevertheless, really excited for my Patriots. I think Mike Vrabel is going to be a great coach and really excited to see where this team goes. That is going to wrap it up for this episode of Chop It Up. We want to thank you guys for tuning into the show. Be sure to check us out, Spotify, YouTube, if you're more into watching the episode rather than just listening. And then we'll have snippets from this episode throughout the week on Instagram and TikTok, as long as TikTok's still up. Heard it's getting shut down. Don't really know. We'll see. So just thank you for watching. Be sure to catch us on social media and drop a comment, drop a DM, whatever you want. Reach out and see what you want to see more of on this show as football season winds down. We want to thank you guys, and we will catch you later.